Hello! I'd like to start this video by thanking everyone who helped to organize this readathon. I think it was very well done. All of the printouts and the website and everything were beautiful, and I had a great time, and I'm just very thankful for that. And especially during a time like now, I think it's great to be able to be doing fun things like this to lift everyone's spirit. And before I get too far, one of the criteria I had when doing this challenge was I don't want to read any books for this that aren't already on my physical TBR. So they didn't have a book that exactly is maybe the word I'll use, fit into some of the said criteria, but I tried to do it as close as I can. For anyone who's somewhat impatient, I'm going to start by doing a quick overview in the order I read them from first to last, every book and the category it was for, without any reviews or anything, which will come later. First, at the beginning of April, I read my Care of Magical Creatures book, which was Cricket Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, Shadow and Bone, also by Leigh Bardugo, for History of Magic. For Arithmancy, I read Becoming by Michelle Obama. For Defense Against the Dark Arts, I read Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. A lot of Leigh Bardugo in this readathon for me. For Charms, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I finished the Leigh Bardugo Grisha trilogy with Ruin and Rising for Herbology, which is, as I mentioned, something that had to be extrapolated because I didn't have a book on my TBR that started with I. For Transfiguration, I read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I thought Harry Potter would be a very fitting book to read for this readathon. Quite obviously. I don't think I need to explain why. Then for Potions, I read On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, which is, I think, actually the smallest book I've ever seen. For Ancient Runes, I read The Duke with the Dragon Tattoo by Carrigan Byrne. Next, for Muggle Studies, I read The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. Then, for Divination, I read The Things She's Seen by, and this one I looked up an interview to try and pronounce it as close to accurate as possible, was by Anne Molina and Ezekiel Kwai-Malina. And finally, last but definitely not least, for Astronomy, I read Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban by, I'm sure everyone who's watching this knows, J.K. Rowling. Just a quick about me, my life during the readathon. I am a freshman in college. I'm doing online school now, and I was throughout, I think, pretty much all of the readathon. We started very beginning of April, back from spring break. This is actually kind of a busy quarter for me. I thought it wouldn't be because it was online, but as I was sorely mistaken, my teachers had different ideas for what was going to be going on in my life this quarter, so it's been my busiest quarter so far. My others were not bad, to be honest, looking back on them. At first I thought it was just because I had poor time management skills, but actually doing like a real analysis of it, no, I just have more work. So that's great. Yeah. So, getting into what you probably all care a little bit more about, the books. We'll start back at Cricket Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. I'm sure a lot of you have read this book. I have now read this book. I really enjoyed this book. This one was for Hippogriff, which was like something with a bird or a beak on the cover. I mean, if you have eyes, I hope. Or, you know, maybe all the power to you. There's a beak on the cover. I read Six of Crows right before this in March is the month before April, right? Yeah, that month. I really enjoyed it, but I liked this one more. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I was not the hugest fan of the ending. I don't know. It wasn't as like, it wasn't the grand finale that I was hoping for from this duology, if that makes sense. Otherwise, I really loved it. It was 4.5. I mean, I thought the world building was amazing. The plot is really intricate. The problems I had in Six of Crows were mostly solved. I gave that one a flat 4. Overall, I really liked this book. I thought the characters were really interesting. I wouldn't call them necessarily morally gray like a lot of people would. Maybe just Kaz. But even then, yeah. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought the characters were really interesting and fun, and it was fun. That's the best way I can put it. Fun. Next, I wanted to keep going. I've read this book 3 times now, and then I read it once, and then I stopped the trilogy, and then 2 years later I read this one, and then Siege and Storm, and then I stopped, and now it's 2 years again, and I finally finished. So this one, I liked it. It's fun. I liked it more than I have any of the other previous 2 times I've read it, I think, because now I have read Six of Crows. It fleshes out the world a lot more, and it's more enjoyable, because I feel like one of the main aspects missing from this book is the world building, which is why I didn't enjoy it as much as the other 2 times I read it before. But now that the world has been pre-built off Six of Crows, this can kind of piggyback on it, and it's better, if that makes sense. And then it's great. So yeah, I gave this one 4 stars, I'm pretty sure. Yes, 4 stars. This book was for History of Magic, which was like wizard magic. Next, I read Becoming by Michelle Obama. I listened to this on audiobook throughout the other ones. Ooh, myself in the face. This was really beautiful. It's just Michelle Obama, the US First Lady, her autobiography, the previous First Lady. It's so beautiful and it's so powerful, and she's just like a great woman. Like, my goal in life, when I grow up, I want to be Michelle Obama. Why? She's amazing. This autobiography is just as amazing as her. I gave it 5 stars. I cried. I got chills. Fabulous. And that's on audiobook, not even in text. Like, I don't think I would have emotionally survived if I read this book by text, apparently. So, just really amazing. Would recommend. This one was for arithmancy, which was read a book that's not in your usual genre. I would consider your favorite genre. I would consider it YA paranormal romance / YA fantasy. This is adult nonfiction, so pretty different if you ask me. I read number 2 of the Grisha trilogy, all by Leigh Bardugo. This one was for Defense Against the Dark Arts. It has maybe this chunk of it, not to spoil, but it takes place on a boat. So it counts. This is by far my least favorite in the series. I give it 3 stars. When I read YA fantasy, I prefer for the plot, I guess the conflict of the book, to be based externally. In this book, it was based internally. When YA fantasy books tend to have more internal conflicts or like political intrigue, they have a harder time holding my attention, and this kind of fell into that. It's more about our main character's kind of emotional turmoil throughout this process and political intrigue. Well, the other one was more plot based and had a lot more action scenes. This one just was not as good as the others. I have to say it. This one I also read on audiobook, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I give this 4. It's for charms. My copy does not have a dust jacket. I got it used online. That makes it even more white. I would argue the front cover is pretty white, even with the dust jacket on. This is a book, I'm sure you've also heard of it. It's about race and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that they should read this in schools, honestly. I think it's really powerful. I think it delivers some great messages about today's society. I think it's a great book. While I prefer external conflict in fantasy, I do prefer internal conflict in contemporary. And this book, I took off 1 star mostly for the ending. I was not a huge fan. It kind of shifts from an internal conflict, which is the first maybe 3/4 of the book, and then the last quarter of the end switches to what a weird external conflict, and it takes an odd turn, and I didn't like it. It would have been 5 stars if it had ended where I wanted it to and not kept going. I finished up the Grisha trilogy. This was for herbology, which was a book starting on I. As mentioned, I don't have a book that starts with I, so I went for the I noise. We have ruminant and I-zing. Yes, hopefully you understood that. This is the 3rd book in the Grisha trilogy. I could give you a summary, but it would be a spoiler. This is obviously the conclusion. I gave it 4 stars. I liked it. It was a lot closer to Shadow and Bone than Siege and Storm, which is what I had been hoping for. It was, again, external conflict, which was great. You see some characters that you see in Six of Crows. And although I would recommend reading Six of Crows before this, because you can kind of let the world building of Six of Crows, let these books piggyback on them, Six of Crows does spoil some stuff that, a lot of the major twists that happen in this book. Also, the epilogue of this book for the trilogy, gorgeous. I loved it. It was great. All of these books have epilogues, but obviously because this is the epilogue of the epilogues, that was a love pat. 4 stars again, but I know I seemed excited, but I had to take off because, like I said, although you can piggyback the world building of the other books, this one was kind of missing it. I was a little slow at times, to be honest. Yeah. Next, for Transfiguration, I read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. This book was for Transfiguration, which I said. Originally I picked this one because I knew from the movie it had the Polyjuice Potion in it, which I was like, that's kind of interesting. As I found out when I went to reread the prompts last night, it even more fits in because it says book in a series / thing, and I've now read book 3, so I can say this book really fits in to the prompt. It was really good. I have a complicated relationship with Harry Potter. I read book 1 as a child. I thought it was okay. I read book 1 as a young adult, and I thought it was terrible. I thought the pacing was bad. I thought it lacked world building. I thought the plot was a little too straightforward and one-dimensional, and it seemed rushed. It seemed like she overcut. She had this idea before, but then the publisher, because told it was a children's book or something, she thought she had to make it a lot shorter and cut a lot of the depth and other things out of it. And so I was expecting books 1 through 3 to be like that, but I was expecting all the other ones to be good, more adult, which is what I've heard. I actually really liked this book. I think I gave Harry Potter 1 2 stars. This one I gave 4. Oh, this one was just fun. I listened to it on audiobook. Man. Okay, I don't know if it was because I listened to it on audiobook or if because the world building and the character development is kind of stacking as each book goes on, but I really enjoyed this. I was fully along for the ride. I was living for it. I do this thing where I like to listen to audiobooks, and I have a little coloring app on my phone, and I color on my phone. I could do that for hours, and I did with this book. It was really fun, and for me, I feel like listening to it on audiobook really helped the experience, because when I'm listening to something on audiobook, I generally tend to be a lot more plot focused and less focused on writing style and imagery and that kind of thing as I am when I'm reading a physical book. So reading this by audiobook, I feel really helped it, because it the plot, it was a lot better paced than in book 1, in my opinion. So on audiobook, it translated really well for me. And I really like this one, which is good, because I like to enjoy books that I devote my time to reading. Next, I read, I did not like this book. This was an old book for class, but it got taken off the syllabus, but I still had it. So this is On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. I give this 1 star. This book. It's a series of 20, I think, poorly written essays about precursors to tyranny. It was all over the place. It was basically a list of evidence that was presented in a very unengaging way with little explanation. Like I said, this is an essay. It's a series of essays. So it was a lot of evidence and then not a lot of explanation. I thought some of the essays could have combined into one. I thought the focus as you went through the essays often diverged, often maybe completely, or it would take a detour. I just really did not like this book. I thought it was poorly written. I don't necessarily disagree with any of like the political statements or claims he makes. I just disagree with the way it was written. A very short book. Obviously it's potions. It felt really long, which is unfortunate. Next, I read Not Another Winner, which was The Duke with the Dragon Tattoo by Kerrigan Byrne. I give this book 2 stars. I read For Ancient Runes. It does not have a heart on the cover, as you can tell. I don't have any books with a heart on a cover. I scoured them left and right. All of them, none of them did. This one has heart, the word, as a word on the back, so I just counted it. It is adult romance. Our main character, Lorelai, is, when they first meet this guy, she is like 14. She is driving with her father and brother, who abuses her and her father, down the road when they see a living man in a mass grave on the side of the road. And so they decide, well, Lorelai convinces her father and brother to like help him and take him to a doctor. And she nurses him back to health, and he has amnesia. That's one of the main plot points. He doesn't remember anything before waking up in this ditch. Although there is like a prologue where you find out. So that's not really a mystery, you know. They have a very close bond, they grow. And then one day he leaves and never comes back. So she then, 20 years later, is kidnapped by a man who turns out to be the guy from before, except he's now evil. That is our plot. That's what we're working with. I thought the very beginning, before he leaves, and the very end, the epilogue, were really cute. I really liked them, which is why it has more than 1 star. All of the middle bit, no. I thought it was poorly placed. I thought at times it was a bit creepy, which my standards to consider something creepy are pretty high. I read Midnight Sun, you'll see that later, and I enjoyed it. And so if I think this book is a little bit creepy and edging into like a little bit rapey, through multiple ways. We have multiple times when they first meet, he is 18 and she's 14. That was a really complicated issue I had with this book. You look at it, like this book does that a lot, where it's like you're reading it and you're like, is that like statutory sexual assault? Like, is that legal? Oh, it's all pre this. You get close to it, but it never officially happens until she consents. But there are a couple times before where they get very close. He gets very close, I guess, without her consent. And then that's actually a recurring theme in this book. And he enjoys it. And then they all go back and like, oh, she's enjoying it too. Also, she like didn't consent. So it, then also, is she enjoying it? A lot of the times it was no. Yeah, that's why I didn't like this middle section. That uncomfortableness, along with the fact that it was just poorly placed and very slow, and the subplot underneath the romance of this is like finding out about his past, but you already know because of the prologue. So the characters were very one-dimensional. They didn't seem well developed at all, which is hard in a romance book. It's hard to read about undeveloped, one-dimensional characters in a book about two people falling in love. It's not fun. Anyway, 2 stars. I listened to this one on an audiobook. The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo was for Muggle Studies. It's about a normal girl. She is human. Whose family is from the Dominican Republic. Her mother is very religious, although she is questioning. And she is very passionate about poetry, hence the Poet X. And so this whole book is kind of a coming-of-age story about her discovering her own identity, even if it is against the wishes and morals of her family. It also talks a lot about women's bodies and the sexualization of them without their consent, which I really enjoyed. I really liked that. I gave this one 3 stars. I will admit I am not a huge fan of books in verse, which probably might have affected my rating. The format does not lend itself to what I look for in books, which is like imagery and in-depth world building and like character development. I generally like to read longer books because that is what I like in books. It's like I like them to be lush. This is obviously kind of a short book in verse. One thing this book did have going for it though was it has my favorite poem in it I've ever read. I literally cried when I listened to this on the audiobook. It was so good. It's My Mother and I. It's on page 340. It speaks to my soul. Yeah, I think this book is really powerful. It was in verse, which for me is negative. For some, it might not be. This one, The Things She's Seen. I read this for divination. Originally, when I did the divination, I did my whole TBR. I got The Nightingale by, it's behind me, Kristen Hanna. I got The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna.
That's a thick ass bar!
I want to read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I didn't want to rush it, and so I realized there are books on my TBR that I don't want to read during a readathon because I think it'll impact my enjoyment of them, and I want to enjoy every book I read to the fullest possible. I put aside books that I don't think would be affected by the fact that I read them during a readathon, and divinated, randomized from those. And I got The Things She's Seen by, we've talked about the name, Anne Bolena and Ezekiel Quaimalina. This book takes place in Australia, which is interesting. I bought this book a while ago. It was for another video that never happened. It was a book I bought solely based on the cover from thrift books. I didn't know what it was about. This book is a book of many synopses, so you'll go through the journey with me. When I first bought it off thrift books, I thought it was a book about a girl who dies and is a ghost who falls in love with a boy. I was like, ooh, cute, paranormal romance. No, when I read it, the synopsis in here, it's actually a book about a girl who is a ghost who is haunting her father. He can see her, and they're solving a mystery. So it's a thriller with a ghost dad detective duo for our main characters. And then I read the book. I read said book, and it was not, well, I mean, it was kind of, but also not. When I was first reading it, I was like, oh, it's like a middle grade thriller, and that's also kind of what I thought from the synopsis. No, it takes a turn quick. It turns into not a middle grade thriller, but it edges more towards literary fiction, and it's dark. Quick insertion. I'd like to mention that if you are especially worried about trigger warnings, I might look a little bit more into this book. When I say especially worried, I mean especially worried because this book it's not extremely graphic in a sense, but it is a major plot point, and don't want to be specific because that would be a pretty big spoiler. As I said, it does have a mystery thriller aspect. I just want to give a heads up just in case. This book is, I can't remember the exact word, but it's a story, and each thing in the story is kind of a symbol. So it's an extended metaphor for two things, which is what I did not enjoy about this book. I didn't like how the same symbols were representing two different things at the same time. For A, which is the symbolism I enjoyed more and was more clear, the relationship between the Aboriginal peoples of Australia and the colonizers from Europe. And the other symbolism is grief. This book is told half from Beth's perspective and the other half from Ketching's perspective. And Beth's perspective is like your typical narrative style, and it's happening in the present. And then Ketching's perspective is told in verse. Oh my god, it literally just clicked in my brain. It's told in two halves. The same symbols. In Beth's side, it's about grief. And in Ketching's side, it's about the Aboriginal peoples and colonization. I should also mention that this book is own voices. The two authors are Aboriginal. They're a brother-sister duo. I gave this book 3 stars. The pacing a little bit odd. The ending a little bit odd. Actually very odd, very odd. And I think also maybe I didn't enjoy it as much because it wasn't what I was expecting at all. This book was a little bit weird. It's a lot closer to literary fiction, I would say. Maybe like YA literary fiction, if that's a thing. I thought the extended metaphor, especially Ketching's with the Aboriginal people, was really interesting, and I really liked it. I didn't like Beth's symbolism as much. Like the grief aspect, that was not as clear or as well developed. And finally, the biggest pain of all of the books, astronomy. This was the one you had to read entirely at night. I read Harry Potter, The Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. I don't read at night. I do my homework at night and then I go to bed. That's my routine. This book was by far the one that took me the longest to get through, just because, like I said, I could read it entirely at night. I read it majority through audiobook. I would maybe 1 or 2 chapters text. I gave this one 4 stars too. I really enjoyed it. I like how this series is taking a darker turn, as we see in this book. I'm enjoying that. This one was my favorite because it has the Marauders. I don't know how to say it out loud. It has them in it, and they gave it 4 stars. It just wasn't quite there for me yet. I think it was mostly the way the ending worked out. But I'm gonna try and be spoiler free here because, like me, some of us have not read Harry Potter and don't want it spoiled for us. So, as we've seen with The Cursed Child, yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of the ending. I didn't quite understand why it had to be the way it was. I was kind of on the same boat as Harry throughout the ending, if you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, why can't they do this? And then Hermione is like, no, we can't. I'm like, but why not? I think J.K. Rowling realized the same thing though, because I've heard this ending is resolved later in the series, and they kind of get rid of that plot hole. Otherwise, I really liked it. Again, the second one, it was just really fun. It was fun to listen to. I was along for the ride. It was a great time. I'm loving these. So those were all my OWLs. When I was looking last night, I saw there was a form to count your pages, which I'll fill out. I am in Ravenclaw, so I guess I'll be filling it out for that. I took the Pottermore quiz, but also as a child, when Harry Potter like toured, I was able to sit under the hat from the movie, like the prop, and it sorted me into Ravenclaw. So I'm like even double in Ravenclaw, which is like fun. And so I saw there was one like Dragon Tamer. It was read a book about a dragon. It is the 30th. I should mention that. The readathon is not officially over for like whatever 12 minus 3 is. So I guess I could read The Goblet of Fire, which is the only book on my TBR that has dragons in it. This is gonna be a real stretch, so you can tell me what you think, future Susan, who's maybe the only person watching this, or anyone who stumbled upon this video. The other book I read was Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. I guess it could count for that if you consider Edward's inner demons to be dragons. Okay, if you count Midnight Sun as transfiguration, follow my logic here, we have some shapeshifty werewolves. Then you could count The Chamber of Secrets as the dragon book. There, I've done it. Problem solved. I really love that book. I gave it 5 stars. It's unfinished. It's an unfinished, like, leaked manuscript. It really appealed to, I like to call it my monkey brain, where it's the part of your brain that's like sex, drugs, action. Nothing else is necessary to please me. I really enjoyed it in that sense. It was a great time. It was kind of what I wanted the Duke with the Dragon Tattoo to be. But then that one took it too far. So, I'm gonna fill out the forms and count the pages and then come back with a final number of how many pages I read. Alright, the grand total is 4,512 pages. I entered it in to the online calculator. That was an experience. You have to do a separate form for each book, which makes sense when I looked at the spreadsheet for math. But there's a lot of like, click another new submission. Humble brag. I had to click the click another new submission button like kind of a lot. I was hoping there could be like, because they had you pick your house, so I was hoping there could be some kind of like house contest to see like which house read the most, which from looking at the spreadsheet, Gryffindor. Yeah, that's the end. Hopefully it didn't go on for too long. We'll see you when I deign to make another video. Bye.